Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is Tuesday, November 17. I had to look because last week I made a mistake. Tuesday, November 17. It is Hampson Foundation with the IDAGIO.com live Song and Beyond series. It's nice to welcome you here this evening. I've got a wonderful guest with us today. Well, actually, I have two guests, but I talk in the third person plural because Christy Finn, who you already know as managing director of the Hampson Foundation, is seldom far away. Thank goodness, even digitally. Tonight, the Song and Beyond is a series we started. Well, I've been doing, as you know, these Idagio lives for since March. It's been fantastic, and every Tuesday we've been concentrating on different kinds of songs or different aspects of songs, different performers of songs, musicologists, presenters, anything. From September on, we had a wonderful development in that we could partner with the Hampson Foundation and the IDAGIO.com, and as well broadcast on Facebook Live, Hampson Foundation Facebook Live site, which is really wonderful because a lot of you song crazies are out there, and thank you very much for following us and staying in tune with what we're up to, because we are all about song. And so we've widened our public, and also it's allowed us to get a little bit deeper into stuff that's really just about song or beyond. Anyway, before I forget, Idagio Live is in fact the place where classic music happens. So welcome today, Tuesday, November 17, and we have Professor, and I know he'll be embarrassed by that title, probably Professor, Doctor, Professor, but we're just going to leave all that off and say Ben Binder. Welcome to the show, Ben. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, thanks for inviting me.
It's also very fun about this. I'm pouring myself a cup of tea here, not a gin and tonic. That's after the show. And actually, before we even get the show started, apropos gin and tonic and champagne, Ben, are you are you warmed up? Are you ready? Are you ready? Here we go.
Okay.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Christy. Happy birthday to you. Ha 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 ha. Gotcha. That's gonna. Your Facebook page is going to go crazy tonight. And rightfully so. Ben, what was part of our wonderful series called Song Mirror of the World, a co-production with the WFMT radio network out of Chicago. And it was 13-week, 1-hour programs of looking at the history of culture through the eyes of poets and the ears of composers, literally trying to let the songs tell the stories of what happens through history. And that's one of my favorite theses. We had started with the Song of America doing the same thing, and it had quite a resonance. And so when I'm getting into this, we're going to get into that a little bit later, but right now we're talking about Ben Binder. And the fun thing about this show that Chris and I really enjoy is that we've actually never met Ben Binder, although we spent some pretty intense, in a good way, working time together, getting a script together, because Ben wrote the 6th show, I think.
That was the 5th show, Paris City of Light.
Right, the 5th show, Paris City of Light. So, Ben, this is all about you tonight. Where do you come from? Where did you mentioned to me in a previous conversation you're a performer, but then kind of found yourself in the weeds of musicology, and you wanted to do both. And where did you grow up? Was your family musical? Were you the first baseman of the local baseball team? Did you play soccer? You know, this is your life, Ben Binder.
Nothing too sporty, not as a child. But I grew up on Long Island, about 40 minutes drive from Midtown Manhattan.
Out in Walt Whitman land.
Yes, actually, the mall I used to go to as a kid was the Walt Whitman Mall.
Oh my gosh.
A quintessential American institution. Across the street was the Walt Whitman birthplace.
I love it.
My brother was friends with someone who used to volunteer there, so that was interesting.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so my grandmother, in terms of my family, my grandmother was the most musical person within sort of the immediate family. She, that's the Italian side of my family. She grew up in New York City, studied piano in the 30s, she was a teenager, and she was a plugger in sheet music stores, and she studied seriously for a while. So she was always on me to study piano, which I did from the age of 4, started taking lessons at 7. But I didn't really get serious about classical music until I was homesick one night from school when I was in high school, and my dad had these Time Life series of great men of music.
Yes, I have it.
Yeah.
I used to collect that. I loved it.
There was like a different colored box.
Yeah.
And for each of these composers. And so I took out the Beethoven one, and I was kind of bored, and I was like, what's going on here? And I heard the Coriolan Overture, and that was it. I was like, this is there's something
I love it.
I need to be paying attention to. So I wanted to be a conductor. In high school, I studied conducting. I did a little composing. I played clarinet. I was playing piano. And then I went to college at Yale University, where I did a lot of all of those things. But that's where I began to fall in love with lieder and art song and working with singers. And in my junior year, I went to Austria to be in the Ames and Graz program.
Oh, great.
And I was going to go for opera repertoire work because I thought I was going to pursue this conducting career. And my piano teacher at the time, she just looked at me and said, "You're not going to like that. You should probably do the art song program," because she just knew that I would be happier doing that. And she was right. And just being in the whole milieu of the German lied and language and around a bunch of people who were also song crazies was very influential on me. And so I ended up not pursuing conducting. I got a master's in piano at Washington University in St. Louis. And one of the reasons I did that was not only to study piano, but also to study musicology, because their musicology and music theory programs there are outstanding. And eventually I decided that academia would be a good place for me would be a good base of operations for me.
Right.
Because I wanted to perform, I wanted to collaborate, I wanted to write, I wanted to teach, do research. So eventually I went to Princeton University for my PhD. That's where I met Laura Tunbridge, who I know is another participant in the series. And my dissertation advisor was Scott Burnham, who was the author, I think, on one of the other programs of Song Mirror of the World.
Yeah, exactly.
And they were very supportive of performance activities along with research. And so it was a very rewarding time. While I was getting my PhD, after my classwork was over, and I was working on my dissertation, or not working on my dissertation, because these things take a long time. I went to the Tanglewoods Music Festival. I was a fellow in the vocal piano program. And that really was incredibly inspiring, and I learned a ton, and I made a lot of connections that really helped me with my performance life that I've been drawing on ever since. And I went to the Cleveland Art Song Festival, so I was really trying to do both performing art song, but also research. And eventually I managed to get my act together. I got my PhD, and I've taught at 2 places in my academic career. I've taught at Lawrence University in Appleton, Wisconsin, where they have a wonderful conservatory that's also associated with a liberal arts college. I did that for 2 years, and then since 2008, I've been here in Pittsburgh, teaching at the Mary Papert School of Music at Duquesne University. And I teach musicology, music history, and sometimes performance. And I do performances around town and other places. Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm at.
Pittsburgh. I've been to Pittsburgh several times and have sung there. And to me, it's I don't want to get all weird on people here, but we always talk the big 5 orchestras, and I just find that so strange because Pittsburgh, there's so many great orchestras now in the world, so in the country. So I think the Big Five mythology of the 40s can be laid to rest. Pittsburgh, I knew them under Mazel, but I really got to know them under Marius Janssens, and now Manfred Honeck, who's a very good friend of mine, is their music director. And I think the Pittsburgh Symphony is just one of the best symphonies, orchestras in our country. I imagine they're dark now too, huh?
Yeah, they're doing a front row series where they are doing sort of concert films with different small ensembles, shooting them around town. So that's sort of their approach, is this year's.
They're filming concerts and putting them online for people to watch.
Yeah, but they're more unconventional. So these are productions that are being done now, except they're not doing the full orchestra on the stage of Heinz Hall and so on.
Okay, I have a couple questions in your bio. You know, by the way, you're in very good company, because exactly the same story, but a different Beethoven piece, was Nicholas Harnoncourt. He was a cellist, and he actually wanted to build theater sets, and he was an extremely, people don't know, extremely accomplished, as in Japanese master wood carving. And he would make his own models and his own puppets, and then do these things. And he was terribly ill and was stuck on the radio, not able to move. And here came Furtwängler and Beethoven Third, and it just completely changed his life. Of course, his brothers are musical. His father was musical. His older, so there was music in the family, but there was an epiphanal moment because of illness. When I got ill, my mother made me iron my dad's T-shirts and handkerchiefs, and when I got good at it, I got to iron his shirts. So there was also certain practicality. I am now the main person who knows how to iron in our family, but I digress. The other question is, when you were living in Long Island, as we say, and were you, as a kid, were you aware that this was hallowed ground of Walt Whitman? Or was that just something just kind of went by?
Yeah, I didn't really put it all together until I was in college.
Have you had a couple of times to be able to make hay on that? Oh yeah, I grew up there. And everybody goes, "Oh my God,"
I mean, now I'm quite proud of it, but I can't say I was really aware of it at the time. Although I do feel like I was experiencing. I mean, the Walt Whitman Mall is kind of funny, but I don't think he would necessarily be opposed to the idea of his name put on a mall.
Well, I don't think so either. But I mean, if you go to his birth house, and if you walk in that area and you go out not too far where there's still some unbuilt areas, you do see these rolling grass fields, and you do see these sand dunes. You if you know Long Island at all, if you get anywhere down where it's less populated and on the water and you're walking through, you can totally, even to today, identify with these lithographs that we have of Walt in his time. Don't you think, though?
No, I absolutely. And, I talk to my parents a lot about how much it's changed. Yeah. I grew up there in the 80s, basically. And, there were still farms near, Huntington and where I live, Melville, Dix Hills area, exit 50 on the expressway, as Long Islanders would talk about it. There was plenty of rural agrarian territory there, and now it's just the suburban sprawl has just kind of gotten out of hand. So now, if you really want to experience the old Long Island that we're talking about, you have to go to the fringes, to the coast, and also further out, or further
down. By the way, all you song lovers out there, I get the impression that the Walt Whitman Society has become very active again over the last couple of years, and they're doing poetry readings, and they do walks, and they do all sorts of wonderful local things in the name of the great prophet, which I like to call him. And so, check out their website. It's quite nice. The place where I spent a little bit of time, I mean, 2 times a visit, was his death house in Camden, and also to the cemetery. And I've been to the sarcophagus that has the door just jarred open, where he said, I leave my door open that I may come and go as I freely need. And when you stand there next to her looking at that, you can't help but believe that, you know, maybe he's just slipped past. I don't know. It's, you know, I'm sorry to digress on your show, but I'm such a Walt Whitman fan that I think it's fantastic to meet somebody who actually born, raised where Walt Whitman came from. So that's very cool. Wear it proud.
Cool. And then I'm in Pittsburgh, which is Stephen Foster territory, of course.
Well, exactly, and I've spent plenty of time there. Exactly, in the Stephen Foster Memorial, and that's a quite an organization. That's where I met Dean Root when he was running that. He's now the head of Grove's Dictionary of Music and Musicians, which I think is very exciting. Anyway, moving on to your show, when the show we did together. And again, you know, we had lists of scholars. The fun thing about this show, ladies and gentlemen, and full disclosure, hampsongfoundation.org, if you go onto that website, these shows that we're talking about, Song Mirror of the World and Song of America, are two independent 13-week 1-hour radio shows in which the byline is the history of American culture or culture seen through the eyes of poets and heard through the ears of composers. And you can listen to them as they were constructed. One of the fun things that Christy and I had putting this together, and there was a whole team, Miriam Lewin, I don't want to leave anybody out in this. It was and Carolyn Paulin at WFMT. I mean, it was a wonderful collaborative and very ahead of its time digital effort. But I won't digress on that. But we had a lot of fun identifying various scholars in whatever idioms we were, whatever periods or whatever subject matter we were after, and asking them to come on board and kind of saying, look, this is a radio show. We need your scholarly expertise, but we need it in a way that everybody driving down I-95 can get it. You know, let's form a music list together. And we try to be very respectful to scholars like Ben Binder or Susan Yowens or Stephen Rogers, you know, who are used to writing wonderfully detailed explorations of specific points, and yet said, can I get you guys to just brain dump in this direction? What was that? Was that a weird request from us, Ben? I've never asked any of you guys. Did you think I was nuts, or did it sound encouraging? I think it was a bit different than how you like to work.
Well, yeah, I was thinking about, first I want to say that this project we're talking about, writing that script, was one of the most fun things I've done as a musicologist. And if I could just do that, I think I'd be happy, because I really prioritize and have as a value making these ideas accessible to people who are interested in music. That it should.
Well, one got that totally in your script, and if all I could do was make these programs happen, that's what I'd do too. Yeah. So I interrupted you.
I think the challenge for me was that once I started brainstorming about repertoire that could fit within this category, you know, I was given a very nice frame of Paris and then its extensions in the 1840s. So once I started thinking, okay, well, what are all the songs that have been composed at that time or that came out at that time? Usually in my scholarship, it begins, I'm provoked by an individual song, because I think fundamentally I'm a performer. Even if I'm kind of, right now in my career, I'm kind of 60% research and scholarship and 40% performing right at this moment in time. I feel like really it all comes from performance. And so if I'm learning a new song, I want to know where it comes from, what it means, why it is the way it is, what were the historical circumstances that led to the creation of this, how has it been interpreted since then, so that that's part of my creative process in interpreting it. And so most of my work, most of the things I've written about or published in, have to do with very specific songs, and then starting with that score or that, you know, that music, that text, and then it radiates outward. Mm-hmm. But this project was really starting with the big picture and saying what would be representative songs that would illuminate these larger trends and forces and developments. So in the end, it was just as fruitful and inspiring to do it that way. but it was a little challenging at first to reorient from the big to the small as opposed to the opposite. One thing that I did, this is sort of an accident. I turned 40 around the time that you asked me to jump on board with this, and I had already been thinking about taking a trip for my birthday to just kind of be resident somewhere and have some fun. And I was leaning towards Paris, and then this came along, and I was like, oh, well, this is great. This is what a coincidence. So in December of that year, whenever we were doing it, I don't remember exactly when it was, but I guess I'm 46 now, so it was about 6 years ago. I decided, okay, so there's tons of cultural stuff, museums and historical sites and art to see, architecture. So what I'm going to do is just limit myself to Paris during the era of Louis Philippe, so 1830s and 40s, with maybe a little bit of before that, just if I feel like it. So I ended up going to the Musée de la Vie Romantique, which was Ari Scheffler's home, where, you know, the salons that we talked about in that program, where Liszt and Victor Hugo and so on would have attended. The song Au Congé d'Or, I think, was on the program. That probably happened in that house in exactly the scenario that we described it. You know, when I went to the Musée Carnavalet, where the Paris History Museum, I just focused on the era that, you know, we were talking about. You know, when I went to the Louvre, I just focused on that period. And it was really, I recommend this to anybody. If you're going to go to these, you know, giant cultural landmark places where there's so much on offer, maybe pick something in, you know, a sliver that you're interested in and just focus on those things, and you start to see connections, and the city comes to life in a different way. It's like you're seeing it as though you were alive back then to a certain extent, because those are all the facts and figures that are bouncing around in your mind.
Well, that leads me to a question. So how did that trip inform your decisions for which songs to include and which information to include? Did anything inspire you specifically? I mean, because the 1840s is really the jackpot of lieder and melody and the real heart of art song. So that's a great thing because you have such a huge collection of things to choose from. But at the same time, where do you even start?
It was an interesting puzzle of putting together composers and the historical situation of Paris and poets, and then the repertoire that's available. So let me explain what I mean. So I think we knew that Berlioz should be part of the program. So, okay, well, what songs did Berlioz write? Right? He has the Les Nuits d'été, and we have the Special de la Rose is one of the songs that we chose. Now that song doesn't really scream politics or even like social developments. It's about you know, it's very romantic. There's a rose pinned on the beloved's dress, and is lamenting the fact that it has to die, but at least it got to die on the bosom of this beautiful woman. And as I think we talked about in the program, you know, Théophile Gautier writes this poem more or less as a kind of escape from reality, escape from the rough and tumble of what's going on politically and socially at the time. So, you know, the trick was, you know, how to include this while also showing that as a reflection of its time, while also kind of being an escape. So that made me think about, you know, Berlioz to try to bring into the program Berlioz's political commitments, that he was there at the 1830 revolutions, and that he wrote the music for the 1840 commemoration of those revolutions, the celebrations that were going on the streets. I think we were able to include some of that music at the beginning of the program, which was not song, but, you know, just to create the backdrop for the song that we're going to hear. And so, you know, I walked those streets. I saw the obelisk. I, you know, I went to a concert at the conservatory, although it wasn't anything like what Berlioz would have experienced. And so I think just kind of being in that geographical place, like it's a physical place that you walk around, but then it's also this mental place that you're reconstructing.
Yeah.
And so these pieces of Berlioz, his political commitments, his political music, his songs, and then somehow these two things that seem very disparate, I think, came together, pretty well in the way that we frame them, so that they would speak of the moment and not be just pure art or pure romanticism.
There's nothing. I mean, everybody that is passionate about classical music really should make their own grand tour or whatever, how they can afford it or do it. Eurail passes are still quite fun. That's how I spent my first month going through Europe. But I think your advice is extremely good, especially for the big cities. London, Paris, Vienna. Probably those three the most, is to identify a particular period or larger epoch and concentrate on it, because you can get so distracted, and because so much has happened over such a long period of time. But that was also kind of my idea that we talk so glibly in Austria from the beginning of Beethoven's songs, who was a German import, as it were, as a person, and then we get all the way to Wolf, and we forget to drop the needle on the Google map, what that means and where they were and where they went to school and what they heard and what was the influences of the culture at the time, and so forth and so on. And I think you captured that in our program very richly, none least of which by just getting a wonderful cross section of Paris in the 40s. The big hitters are going to be Berlioz, Heine, Liszt, Wagner. Whom else am I thinking of? Chopin. These were just, and I think we even pulled Glinka in from Russia for a Paris visit at the time, kind of thing, and the sounds they heard and where these poems would come from. It's a fun way to sort of shake the tree of song. I do feel that sometimes, in general, that our song studies can get so, as we say, tree research oriented, that we forget that the trees are part of a forest. And I'm always trying to find a way to keep that balance. In the resource we're building at the Hampson Foundation, and what these shows are all about and what we've moved forward with, is just simply having the minutiae of the tree research, as well as always throwing that into the middle of what the context of the forest were, just to keep the metaphor going. So I think were there any parts of the show that stick in your mind that were particularly either surprising or tough to get together?
I think some of the most fun discoveries came from the magic of Google Books, where there are so many 19th century sources just digitized and scanned and searchable there, that with some of the more obscure songs, or obscure to me, not so much the composers, but the poets, just digging and saying, okay, well, where did this come from? I'm thinking right now of the Meyerbeer song, which was, the poem there came from a novel written by Joseph Méry. I mean, I
yeah.
Méry,
this is Sicilian.
Yeah.
Right. Wonderful. One of my favorite songs.
It's a delightful song. Remember the Anne-Sophie von Otter recording we used is beautiful. And I just thought, well, okay, what is this poem? Is it in, his collected poetry? It is, but there's not much information about it. I thought, well, this must come from somewhere. And I was able to track down eventually the novel it came from, to put it in context. And we were able to include it in the program. That there's a group of revelers, party goers, and they're on the streets of Genoa. It's kind of an ironic situation that they're in, as I recall. Of course, they're singing about love, and it's just basically a hymn to love in various ways. But this is ironic for certain other characters in the novel. And you just got to wondering, did Meyerbeer have any idea of this? I mean, had he read that novel, would he have assumed that his audiences would have understood the context of the novel, recognized the poem in that context? And could his musical setting maybe be ironic because of the irony that is in the original, novel context? So those are a bunch of questions that I had. And I thought, well, this, we only were able to include just a little sliver of that. But the fact that now at your fingertips, something that would have only been available just sitting in a dusty library for weeks on end, just now just there in 10 minutes, I can, track down these incredibly obscure references.
Yeah.
It just opens up so much creativity. So it was fun to have that opportunity. And because again, some of these songs were songs I might not have paid attention to if not for this historical frame that I was particularly focusing on. I probably wouldn't have done that.
Well, I remember when when your long script came through, and I did not know that poem. I've sung the song a lot. I think I've recorded it twice. I mean, I love the song. It's a little Sicilian. Bum 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 that I did not realize that it came from a gently ironic context inside of a play. I've always just taken it on face value as a lovely twist of French words and articulation, in the punchline being that it is all about l'amour, love. And I cannot tell you whether Meyerbeer read that or not. But what just dawned on me is something we've also talked about earlier, and that when songs move from different context to different context, much less performers to performers, they can take on different gravitas, different points of reference. I'm thinking of the great aria from Die Tote Stadt, a rather lugubrious, wonderful early work of Korngold. And there's this aria of a rather minor figure in the play. It's a play within a play. And he's singing, he's lamenting his life as a gaukler, as a thespian who moves from place to place, not unlike Canio and Pagliacci, but in no way similar in temperament. But actually, as a standalone aria, it's a beautiful aria. And if you take it completely out, and nobody knows anything at all, just say, oh, here's a lovely song by Korngold, then it takes on a whole nother performance life of its own. And where I'm going with this is that you wrote to me an email, which took me back. I had to read the first paragraph a couple of times. And I want to ask you about this because it seemed really interesting to me. This idea of cabaret, this idea of, I guess I want you to explain to me. I took it as meaning, there's always at some point, there's always the portrayal of it, regardless of what the background is, regardless of what lives in that moment as the portrayal of the song, and ergo ignites the relationship to the song is what that song means at that time. Is that where you were going with this? And please, Christy, jump in. We had a conversation about this as well. I love this idea. I had not put the word cabaret so much. But at the end of the paragraph, so any art song we can ask, says you, who sings, who plays, in what manner, and in what context. All of those factors can radically alter the meaning of a song on any given occasion. That is really two quite wonderful sentences. I love the whole email, but those sentences just kind of jumped out at me. And for all of you young singers who are watching this show, yes, this is the place where you should take out your notebooks and take some notes, because we're going to get into some good detail here for a minute. If you want to riff on that a little bit, Ben, we'd be grateful.
Yeah, this is what I'm saying there is something that I think a lot of scholars of lieder, of art song, have been moving towards in the last decade or 15 years, slowly but surely, is a focus away from it's almost a kind of ethical issue, really. When we're performing a song, we have certain commitments to the composer, to the poet. That's sort of what classical music is, I think. It's what maybe distinguishes it most from other forms of music, is this not necessarily devotion, although it is for some people, but
is it the defined elements?
I think it's the idea that this question of that, so many young performers in the classical music tradition are set to asking, which is, what was the composer thinking? What did the composer want? Or what did the poet want? And those are important questions. But ultimately, many of these composers are no longer with us, but we are here. And so it's kind of an ethical question of, what do we want? What do we want from this music, from these songs, from this poetry, from this music? And we sometimes forget that that's important, or we don't realize that actually what we're doing is what we want, even if we say that it's what the composer wanted or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of confusing this up a bit, but because there's a lot of
no. It's good. Chris, do you perform a lot of new music? Does this apply to what you do?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and I think, Ben, don't you have a song institute that you were involved with that also commissioned songs, if I remember correctly, Vancouver Song Institute, is that right?
Yeah, the Vancouver International Song Institute was a summer program that there was a subsection of it called the Song Scholarship and Performance Program.
Mm-hmm.
And this was kind of a think tank for graduate students, as well as professional musicologists, music theorists, singers, pianists. So there was a bit of a training institute, but it was really kind of a big seminar where we would focus on a certain topic. So the last one we did was on Goethe, but we also did one on Schubert. We did one on Brahms and Wolf as a pair, Mahler and Strauss as a pair. And we would, the sort of quintessential event would be a singer and pianist students would get up and perform a song. We'd read the poem beforehand. And then we would have just kind of a free conversation about what is it that provokes us in this poetry and music. What are the questions that we ask? What are the questions that the performers want to know that maybe the musicologists have answers to, and vice versa? What can
in a way, the musicologists are then the proxy for the composers who you can't send an email to, like.
That's true, but of course, we're all drawing on the evidence that we have and making the most of it. But within that context, again, within that specific context of that program, we were very concerned about what the composers thought about and what the poets were after, and what the context was, and what the original meanings of the songs might have been. But even when you look at, just to get back to my original theme here, even when you look at the original performing context of songs, there's still a wide variety of meanings that would have emerged. So I just wrote a chapter that's going to come out next year there's a Cambridge companion to Winterreise that's coming out. And I wrote the song about performance and reception. And I took the approach of performance as reception, that every performance of Winterreise creates another Winterreise, a new Winterreise that is maybe means something radically different than the one that just happened yesterday. And again, these questions of who is performing, for whom, in what manner, in what context.
Do you mean that in both, exactly do you mean that in both the way the performer, or the reasons for which the performer believes the Winterreise is written and ergo sings it that way, as well as giving every individual listener the right to form their Winterreise in their experience?
Exactly. I think something that I've had to remind myself as a performer, something I have to keep reminding myself of, it's not just what the performers have agency, but so do the listeners.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Right.
Actually, I think that's one of the great, back to classical music, to me, that's one of the really great talking points of classical music and live concerts, which I'm sure we will get back to in a big way. But I also love this digital development that we have, and the Global Concert Hall at IDAGIO is one of my favorite projects, as everyone knows. But if you think about it, the classical music is based on specific chosen musical and, in this case, literary elements, and the musical elements are chosen because of the literary elements. I would maintain that the minute poetry becomes part of the music, that it becomes part of the musical elemental structure, which is a lot of defined stuff that is not not the way we run our everyday lives in the 21st century. So it can seem like you're taking a step back, but that's only one thing. But the glorious thing is that to be this specificity becomes a listening experience in a public, collective way, a collective time frame, if you were. We all, 200 or 2,000 of us, have the same heartbeat time signature for that time that piece is being. However, we are all deeply individual timepieces, and ergo take with us what we take with us. I think we can't say that enough about classical music, and I think classical musicians need to talk more about what it is that in its specificity is still releasing and not confining. Part of the reason for this program, IDAGIO Live, and why it's been so popular is because people like you and me and Christy, all three of us from various aspects of the same world that we're in, talking about how we put it together, what it means to us, what we're trying to make available, as you say, give agency to other people. So I think it's wonderful. I do want to catch you on one word. I want to know why you use the word cabaret.
Yeah, that's a good segue because that follows very well from what you were just talking about. I'm just kind of playing with this. I'm not committed to this concept yet, but the reason why I'm interested in cabaret as a form, and I'm talking here about cabaret in New York in the mid 20th century, just a singer, pianist, throwing some songs together. I mean, now you can go to, Michael Feinstein's, club or something, and, hear Broadway singers in particular that's kind of where it's reified now, cabaret in New York. But just pulling songs from popular music, from the Broadway stage, maybe from light opera or something, whatever it is, just the songs that are at hand and wherever they came from. But now they have a new context because of the banter that goes in between songs and the way that the singer sets it up. And this song is meaningful to me because of blah, blah, blah. And then they sing for this audience on this night in this way with voice and piano, because it may have been for a rock band before or whatever it was. And it becomes something very unique and special to that moment. And I think that what I'm playing with is the idea that that's what song is, as opposed to, let's say, other vocal genres that are more situated in their origins, like an opera aria, for example, or a cantata aria or something like that. Now, if you take an opera aria and you pull it into the cabaret frame, and again, I'm branching it out to say not specifically a cabaret, but this idea of any performance context that frames the content as song, then it becomes song. So, Nessun Dorma is an aria in Puccini's Turandot in which Prince Karloff is vowing to win the hand of the princess by solving the riddle or whatever. But when Pavarotti gets up and sings it, for the World Cup opening ceremonies or whatever, I would say that that aria becomes a song because of its migration from that original context. And that's the way that a lot of people refer to all classical music as songs. What was that song? That
all music in general sometimes.
Right. Oh, Pachelbel's Canon, is a song. Like, I love that song. And we classical musicians say, no, well, actually, that's not the correct genre. I guess what I'm saying is that song as a genre is, in fact, that there's something right in what they're saying, that they're talking about. They don't think about genres as narrowly as we do as classical musicians. They think of music as traveling across performance context.
I agree with you. I agree with absolutely what you're saying. What I would like to do is just tilt the spotlight a little bit. I don't. It's not that I don't think it's that we classical musicians, well, some of us do, but it's not that we start banging on genres and classifications more than the essence of what it is, but in fact, what interests us as musicians, as a, very often you'll say to one another, well, it's a lovely symphony, probably better for musicians than for the public, and we've seen that written, we see that described, and that's because we musicians bathe love, can get obsessive about the details inside of how something constructed, as much as what we believe the beauty of it is to simply be heard. And I think what I want to really react to is what you're saying to me resonates with me. And I correct me if I'm wrong, but the common denominator is this human story, is that people identify with the emotional impact of what that song at that moment means. And that could be as much as Pachelbel, somebody can imagine themselves in a cathedral on Easter or under a Christmas tree, whenever they're listening to it, whatever. Or Pavarotti, having that great aria for a completely different expression. I'm thinking about even harmless arias like the one I mentioned, that mentioned the Korngold, or O mio babino caro, which has a completely different context inside of Gianni Schicchi. One of the most remarkable other directions experience I had is when I did Thais, the opera, because you don't get to hear the Thais, the whole thing, very much. And this wonderful meditation from Thais that every violinist learns as quickly as possible. And we have I can't imagine how many versions we have in the database here. And it's wonderful. It's just a wonderful piece. But when you hear it in the third act, as the time when Thais walks away from Athanael's temper tantrum with the people and goes to meditate, and he asks forgiveness, and he goes to meditate on his essential conflict between spirit and flesh, and you hear it played at that point in the opera, it takes on a completely different attitude and a different importance. And what is interesting, if you at that point play it too slowly, you miss the point of the inner struggle of Athanael. This was really interesting because it was perfectly right. When you hear it as a solo piece, it's if you can as legato and as long a bow as you possibly can play it and stretch it out, the more beautiful. But actually, when you hear it in context, he's on his knees, he's praying, he's struggling, and it's his thoughts that come out in this music. So I love what you're saying, and I hope we do have some young colleagues that are paying attention to this, much less publics that love to form their opinions of things. Let's you gave a surprising, and it went on in you gave a surprising example of something you've been looking at. You pulled out the poem Schlechtes Wetter, set to music by Richard Strauss, and we just have enough time to dip into a couple of recordings, perhaps, and have to look at the app of IDAGIO. Christy, have you ever sung Schlechtes Wetter?
No, I haven't. No.
I haven't either. I learned it, and it was on a list for my Strauss record, and I tried to quickly grab it. I know that I didn't record it. What is it about this song, Ben, that strikes you?
A lot of things, and it's been said by others as well.
Yes,
which we won't get into. We'll just focus on Strauss now. So this poem is very peculiar. It's not one of the canonical Heine poems, but right. I think it really captures well the pervasive ambiguity of the tone of Heine's poetry, in a very instructive way. So this poem is about the poet. The poet speaks in the first person, and he says, it's bad weather outside. It's raining and storming and sleeting. I look out the window and into the darkness, I try to see what's out there. And I see this little light shimmering by, and it's a little mother who's out shopping for groceries. And right away at that point, you think, okay, how does he know that that's what the little light represents? And you can start to already see that the poem is really a meta poem about poetry itself. Heine is the poet, and he's making observations about the world and encoding them in his poetic language. Is he recording them objectively as a kind of realist, where he's simply recording what he sees and letting you make the call about the meaning of it all? Or is he really investing his own emotional and psychological, perspective on this in what he's describing? And if you get into the subtleties of his language, you can see that it's really poised in between these two. And then in the second half of the poem, he starts to say, well, I think that perhaps the mother is shopping for eggs and butter and flour to make a cake for her darling daughter, who is at home by the firelight and is blinking into the light sleepily, and her golden curls pour over her face. And that's the end of the poem. Now, by the end of the poem, he's talking about things that he couldn't possibly see. I mean, this is the 19th century. He didn't have a webcam, he wasn't stalking her from afar. I mean, this is completely out of his imagination. And so you have this feint at objectivity at the beginning of the poem, and by the end, it's complete subjectivity. And the whole poem makes you think again about the poet's perspective on the events that he describes. And I think Strauss's song is a meta song about his own creative process. And if you
what do you mean by explain the word meta?
So it's a song about the writing of song. It's a song about how Strauss put poems together with music. And in several places in the 1880s, but as also again in 1918 when he wrote this song, Strauss has comments on records in which he explains that for him, musical inspiration comes first. By some kind of internal process, he doesn't quite know how, but he has life experiences, and then they come forth to him in musical inspiration. He has a melody, an idea, a motif that comes to his mind. He sits down at the piano and fleshes it out a bit. And then he goes in search of a poem to match. And if he can find just the right poem that happens to match his musical inspiration, the song comes out like that. If he finds one that only is approximately close to what he's getting at, he will make the musical melody or whatever his inspiration is fit the poem, and eventually a good song comes out, but it takes a lot of work. And
thank God he found so many good texts.
Yeah, I mean, he was some criticized Strauss for having a more middling taste in texts, but when we think about the music that he wrote that he matched with those poems, I mean, I think they were the perfect match.
Well, I think that the same ridiculous argument is leveled against Schubert and other also equally benign arguments on other platforms are leveled towards Gustav Mahler and how he handled folk poetry. And it's just all very naive misunderstanding of the subject matter. People need to understand those specific relationships of those composers to their poets. The miracle of Schubert is that he found so many individual musical voices for so many different composers. And he was simply fascinated, in my opinion, by anyone that came into his orbit that was trying to say something about the human experience in life. And he was challenged by that. And to me, that's part of the genius of Schubert. Strauss, I agree. Yeah, there's it's interesting about Strauss. Strauss gets a lot of criticism, mainly because his songs became so popular, which is not really his fault. His early songs are just iconic and unbelievably melodically structured. That quote you have about him hearing music, then looking for poetry, is certainly valid. And I know the quote. There are other. What I wouldn't want, however, is to leave the idea of this man, Richard Strauss, who wrote his first song when he was 6 and his last song when he was 89, that it was all just about music and then shopping through the newspaper for texts. He actually was pretty passionate about poetry. And I think also what we tend to overlook is his bulk of, say, from the Opus 10 to into the Opus 20s, into the 1920s, those songs are mostly contemporary poets which I think he deserves a lot of credit for. This Heine poem is actually one of the few poems that he grabbed back for whatever reason. It's just I'm just offering this as a part of the bouquet of our discussion here of composers and poets and composers and thoughts. You know, I've taught this song a couple of times, and I got caught one day, and I had to stop. And I said, I'm on sixes here. I'll come back tomorrow. I need to study this, and because I couldn't get my head around it. I had to laugh when I saw you pull up this song because it's a very complex song. Look, ladies and gentlemen, we're pushing the hour, but we're going to extend it. We're just going to splash over a little bit. I think it's very much worth me doing some screen sharing here. And the next thing you see is going to be the IDAGIO app that I've pulled up. Now, I put in already, if you can see it here, if I can pull it down, schlechtes Wetter, which means bad weather in German by Heinrich Heine. And I just put it, and I immediately pulled up Strauss, and I immediately, what this list over here is all of the recordings of that song in the IDAGIO database. This is really kind of exciting stuff. And so if we get to drop the needle on one, what would you like to drop? Elisabeth Schumann, Elisabeth Schwarzkopf, or Theo Adam?
Let's listen to Elisabeth Schumann because I think that's the earliest recording we have.
And he did, and she went on tour with Richard Strauss, didn't she?
Yeah, in 1921, they went on tour across America, culminating in some important performances in New York. She was known in New York for her performances as Sophie in Der Rosenkavalier.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of important for understanding how audiences would have understood her in this song. And I think also how Strauss himself kind of imagined her role in performances of this song.
I'm looking for it. Schubert. There should be some Strauss in this, but I seem to have landed. It must be down at the bottom. Schumann, Brahms. Here we go. This is a huge collection of Elisabeth Schumann. Wolf, here we go. Strauss Lieder. Some with orchestra and some with piano. Schlechtes Wetter. Now, ladies and gentlemen, pay attention. If you clip on these ellipses, you will get a little like this, save to collection, save to playlist. If you click save to add to playlist, you're going to have your list of playlists over on this other side, on the left-hand side, and you can, well, I'll show you. If I go here, we go to playlists, and you can create a new playlist and say we wanted to create a Strauss playlist, or you want to create a who the hell knew that playlist, whatever you want to call it. You can see I have several playlists already here from the shows I've been doing and my own private playlists. But let's say we're not going to do that. We're going to go back out here, and we're going to go back to Schlechtes Wetter. If I push this little chevron, which I really would suggest before you play anything, because two things will happen. One, you get a little bit more information. We're going to hear a man named Carl Alwyn, who is not known. Do not be confused by this date. She did not record it in 1992. This is the newest pressing that is on idagio.com. Elisabeth Schumann was long dead, and this song was recorded sometime in the 20s, which may sound like a little bit, but there you are. And Elisabeth Schumann, what we're all building in Idagio right now, what should happen is if you click on Elisabeth Schumann, it should go to some information about her. But I have some really good news for you. If you'd like to go to the hamsongfoundation.org, we have quite a bit of information on Miss Elisabeth Schumann, as in we were asked to take over the archive for her a while back, and we very gladly did. Same way with Schumann Hank and the great American forgotten composer Eleanor Remick Warren. It's great fun to go drop your needle in the hamsongfoundation.org. We are now going to listen. This song is only about 2 minutes long, so we are going to listen to the whole thing. Is that a good idea, guys? Let's do that, and then we'll have a quick chat and out. And I promise everybody you will be 15 minutes later to dinner. I promise. I love it. Okay, what do you think?
Well, there's a million things to say. Carl Alwyn was Elizabeth Schumann's husband at the time. He was an opera
Ah,
coach,
thank you.
and he plays with a great deal of liberty in the score, changing some notes, just speeding up all those arpeggios, which you would not hear today, where there's more faithfulness to the score. But again, Strauss himself probably played in a very similar manner, as we know everything about the way that he accompanied singers.
I got to tell you, Ben, I'm sorry to interrupt again. Just exactly what you've said. We need to have you again for another show. Because this, it isn't a typewriter. The score, a Google map is phenomenal in its detail, but unless you take the trip, it's still a Google map. And music and notation, has had. I want to get a couple of you guys, you wonderful musicologists, and let's talk about what musical notation represents. Christy, you do a lot of music. I'm sure you've done a lot of Strauss. Two points I want to ask you about. One, that musical notation, if I'm completely nonsense. But the other thing is, you always hear people, we all three hear always people when they say, oh, I don't really like song. I like opera and I like cabaret and I like music and Broadway comedy. And it's too refined and so forth. And all the singers, you have to have chops to sing this song. This is flexibility. This is range. This is a completely convoluted text, as we've already talked about. And Mr. Strauss is zero help. What do you think, Christy?
I agree with all of that. Yeah, I don't really know where it comes from that people say things like, oh, I don't like opera, I don't like song, too refined. It can be complex, but it is also raw human emotion. And we have to acknowledge that it has both sides, and people like Ben can dig into all of these minute details, which are fascinating when people get to know them. But then there's also just kind of the emotional experience of listening to that incredible voice and to that incredible song, to that incredible accompaniment, and the way that it's played that just kind of pulls at you without, for people who don't know any German, I'm sure that it still elicits some sort of emotional feeling, and that's the beauty of Strauss, and that's the beauty of song in general. So notation, yes, let's do a notation show, Tom.
Let's do a notation show.
That will be
that's going to be your show. You live in a world of you live in a world of notation that I didn't want to know about. I think you have to go, Christy. Ben, do you want to add something? Do you want to, and I know everybody else get to get dinner, and I really don't mean to stretch it out. We've had our time with it. What else do you want to say on the show? Give us a final closing reason why all of this stuff makes sense.
Well, I'll just follow up on what we just heard as a way of closing. That what I find interesting about this performance, riffing on what Chrissy just said, is that it's so engaging, it's so dramatic. She tells a story, and even if even just with my little summary of the poem and not knowing German, you can tell the characterization that she was so famous for is so present and alive in that recording, and so faithful to the text, is to the score is really beside the point. And I think what comes out in her dramatization is that she's not really singing mainly as the poet or the composer or some onlooker to the scene. She's singing as this self-centered daughter who's at home blinking into the firelight with her golden curls and so on. She is the diva, and so she sings it almost as one of the characters who is described, but from that first person perspective. And I just find that to be such an incredible transformation of that song, that until I thought about her and I listened to that recording and I thought about the context of those performances with Strauss, I would never have heard the song that way. And all of a sudden, certain features of the song just made sense. Like, why is there such a high note on the word cake?
Yeah.
Why is that such a climactic moment? She's going to bake a cake. Well, who's most excited about the baking of the cake? The daughter who's going to get to eat the cake. Mm-hmm. So, suddenly aspects of the score that, Strauss may not have intended that when he wrote it, but when he performed it with Elizabeth Schumann, I think he was all in with that as the dramatic.
Well, you
focus.
do hear glimpses of Zerbinetta in there, and a little bit of Arabella. I mean, it's Opus 69, so it's already in the 20s, and Ariadne is long vorbei. But you hear themes that, or even Till Jugendspiel. I gotta wait in here just to. I've heard that said about the girl rather self-satisfactorily with her golden curls, but there's also something existential in this poem that Heine did like, and in the whole song cycle Heimkehr, there are these vignettes. I mean, Heine would have been one of the first great screenwriters if the idiom had existed. He creates unbelievably visual, realizable poetic images, and there's the bad weather, there's the closed off community. The last one to get in before the weather really gets awful is mom, who's got groceries because that's what we do come shine or hell or high water, it's got whatever. And all of this stuff could seem like, every generation has a storm. Oh, it was storm last night. It was apocalyptic. Think of it. The schlechtes Wetter sounds like seriously schlechtes Wetter, and people are doing what they do. And the one guy's already made it inside. He's looking out his window. He's toasty warm. The fire's cracking about, and he's looking at this poor woman, and she's got, and he can maybe even you see the girl, which is pure youth. Youth doesn't care about schlechtes Wetter, and the gold hair and the adornment of meals and happiness is what youth is all about. So after all of this darkness, in the last analysis, get home and bake the cake. There's some part of that poem that speaks to me on that level as well. I hate to somebody in one of my classes, somebody really went off on this poor girl, and I just thought, I want to cut this girl a little bit of slack, but yes, there's something, and her music from Strauss is terribly self-aggrandizing, but let's just pretend she's 11 years old and she's got no business being anything but 11 with beautiful hair.
And that's what I find so charming about this song, about Strauss's approach to it, and then about song in general, is that again, it is so malleable and so flexible. And I think Heine is the quintessential art song poet.
Yeah.
Not only because he wrote he has more settings of Lieder than any other poet, period. Goethe doesn't even come close, and he's like a second place. Is that his poetry can go in so many different directions. It can be read in so many different ways.
Layers, yeah.
And it depends on performance to bring it into one of those many directions, and multiple directions even at once in the same performance. That
is the most wonderful thing we've all three of us said all night. Thank you for closing off with that. Yes, it is all about the performance and the time and the people involved, and wonderful. Ben Binder, what are you working on right now? Are you writing another book?
I am co-editing a book where some of this material we talked about today will be featured, as well as some other things. That has a lot to do with musicology and performance coming together, blurring those boundaries. It's in the early stages. And I'm working on a lot of teaching things, excuse me. But I'm thinking about trying to branch away from German Lieder, perhaps in the next iteration. other kinds of songs, other traditions.
Come on over to Song in America. We need your brain. Call us. We're yours. It'd be great. Anyway, Christy, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Ben Binder. It's been a wonderful visit. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being our audience. Thank you for tuning into IDAGIO.com. Thank you for using IDAGIO.com, the largest, wonderful, first great streaming platform built for classical music by classical musicians. The IDAGIO live series, where we get to actually visit and explore people's minds for you and with you. And of course, the Global Concert Hall. Always check out on the IDAGIO.com website what the next concert is. I think we got Yo-Yo Ma again this week. I mean, it's a lineup that is really very exciting. And take care of yourselves. It's COVID out there. we're glad to be part of your lives inside, away from the schlechtes Wetter. Good night. See you.